The Doc's new investment option.
Lead bullion.
Buy your ammunition from the Doc today at sdbullion.com.
This is the Doc with silverdoctors.com. Joining us today, once again as returning guest in front of the show, Jim Willie, the editor of the Hat Trick Letter found on the Golden Jackass website. Great to have you back, Jim. It's been a while.
It's been a few months. I think it's been about 4 or 5 months.
Always great to have you back here. So let's get right into things here, Jim. A lot going on, especially in the gold and the banking sector here right now over in Europe. The big news over the last couple of weeks is the German gold repatriation story and the minuscule amount that they've gotten back from the Fed. Year one in 2013 of their repatriation request, rather than the 300 tons that they're owed, and even over 7 years, like 30 or 40 tons a year it was scheduled. They got 5 tons back from the New York Fed, and those 5 tons were recast. So I wanted to start right off here with the German gold. Jim, in your opinion and your perspective, what's the importance of the German gold repatriation request made just over a year ago now?
I think it started a panic phase in the gold market. The entire process of draining gold out of London and Switzerland and directing it eastward and recasting, that whole process seemed to start about a year ago. I don't have the exact date, but I think it was sometime around December of 2012. I don't have the exact date in front of me, but it's been a little over a year. And if you notice, a lot of the different events that have happened in the gold market and related markets, all the different disorder began when the Germans demanded the repatriation. The market slams, the just outrageous naked shorting with no concern whatsoever by COMEX and LBMA for being noticed. They don't care anymore. It's being done in the open. There's a lot more description of the action being done in the open. I think it means that the Fed, London, and Paris were all caught red-handed stealing German gold. The parliamentary leaders from Germany, this happened around September of 2012. The parliamentary leaders went to the New York Fed and they were turned away. They were told, you can't see your gold, get lost. I mean, what is it? This is crime syndicate activity. I think the U.S. government, bank officials, Fed officials are being revealed as running a crime syndicate. I took a close look. Something was brought to my attention. It's called the U.S. Department of Treasury Status Report of Owned Gold. And in the end of August 2000, there was a ledger item. It was 54.097 million ounces West Point, New York gold bullion reserve. I did a calculation. It's 1,681 metric tons. That's a lot of gold. Then, end of September, 1 month later, end of September 2000, almost exactly the same, just I think 30,000 less ounces, 54.067 million ounces, West Point. Notice the designation, West Point, New York, custodian gold bullion. All right, so it was marked as, let's just say German gold and other nations' gold, sovereign gold, official gold accounts. All right, 2 years later, end of September 2002, again, 54.067 million ounces, but the designation on the ledger item changed again. West Point, New York, deep storage gold. There you go. The smoking gun is the deep storage gold. It means it's gone, and they're relying on future mining operations like with Barrick. They're usually the collusion agent.
And Jim, I just want to interrupt you here quickly for those listening, just to reemphasize that. So the ledger item changed from designating it as gold bullion reserves in August of 2000 to in September they changed it to custodian gold bullion, to 2 years later to deep storage gold. So the description changed from gold bullion reserve to custodian gold bullion to deep storage gold.
Yes, and that's really important. I'm glad you emphasized that, because it means it went from actual gold to something understood to be someone else's allocated gold to missing gold.
Essentially, it means it was rehypothecated.
I think that's definitely the conclusion, but it started a severe process of mass drainage from New York vaults, exchange-traded funds, raids on GLD, and you know, it's more than that. I like to look at the geopolitical and you know, paradigm shift, all these different things. It looks like the Germans at that point, in response to their rebuffed demand for their own gold, their gold. It's not like, can you give us some gold? No, can you give us our gold? The Germans started turning eastward, and I think as a result started forging alliances with Russia and Germany. Very few Americans realize that there are several new heavy rail facilities going from Russia, ending in Germany. The COMEX gold inventory started getting drained right after the German repatriation demand. The J.P. Morgan eligible gold inventory that's right next door to the Fed, or is the Fed, connected through underground tunnels to the Fed. Okay, its gold inventory started to be drained. And now we're seeing these official inventories 50% down or more in the last 12 months or so. The GLD ETF, which is for morons out there who think that they're going to be buying gold, it's not. It's a grand con game. It's a fraud. You've pointed this out many times. It's down in its inventory 35% from peak. And you get these false stories out there, John, like, oh, Soros and somebody else are taking out their gold from the GLD. No, they're not. They're redeeming their shares. They want to get their gold medal, bullion, bars out of the GLD before they're vanished. It's not like, oh, we got investors departing. No, you got the biggest investors demanding their gold before it's stolen. The story is exactly the opposite. But, you know, here's another really weird story that came out. This was about, I don't know exactly, 8 or 9, 10 months ago. The French announced with the British that they're going to go to war in Mali, in Western Africa, because there were some terrorists spotted near the gold mines. Well, it's more than that. They got uranium mines there also. Few Westerners realize that these African nations are large. Just to put things into perspective for you, what, I can't remember the full name of it, I call it the Congo. The Congo is as large as all of Western Europe. Just the Congo. Western Europe is small. All right, so they announced a new war. I mean, hey, we're going to do a war. Hey, isn't it great? It's like going to a baseball game. Hey, we're offering a new war. So they're offering a new war in Mali, and just curiously, the annual gold output that has been known from Mali matched exactly the planned 7 years to repatriate the German gold. You know, you got other things like the Swiss allocated gold accounts are slowly getting, I shouldn't say slowly, are increasingly being scrutinized by the wealthy. And here's a funny little point, just it's a strange point to close out this topic, if you will. I've got a contact in Panama, and I met him. We've had lunch a couple times. He's a great guy. He's an American. And he's been down there for about, I don't know, 11 or 12 years, I think, maybe 10. But he's a very reliable fellow with some contacts. He's been there long enough to know some people in the banking industry. And he said, Jim, there's a stage 3 gold depository that's several months along now in Panama. And we thought, oh, gee, let's see if that means the Panama government is moving toward a gold-backed new Balboa currency and getting off the dollar. Because their entire economy and banking system is on the dollar in Panama. Few people, you know, fully understand that. You know, people in the know do. But here's the funny part about this Panama private gold depository. It's for European clients who no longer trust Switzerland. He just said it in those words. He said, these are for European clients. It's not for the government of Panama accumulating gold. It's for people, wealthy Europeans in Switzerland, Germany, Netherlands, elsewhere. They don't trust the Swiss anymore. So, private entity is now building a huge depository in Panama. My guess is it's going to have a second side to it that's eventually going to be the Panama government and their central bank, because he also said word is all over the place in Panama City that they're accumulating gold by the government in order to launch a gold-backed currency. So the Americas, not U.S. necessarily, the Americas, the Switzerland of Latin America, namely Panama City, is going to go gold-backed, and they're building a depository. That's pretty big news for this region, John.
It is pretty big news. Well, why don't we move on a little bit here, Jim, and keep the topic or the focus on Germany still. The other big news, along with the report of the amount of gold that Germany was able to repatriate in year one, was the news breaking last week that Baffin is investigating precious metals manipulation. And I want to read a quote here from Elke Koenig, the president of Germany's top financial regulator, Baffin, who said last week that precious metals manipulation is worse than the LIBOR rigging scandal. And in my mind, the allegations about currency and the precious metals markets are really particularly serious because unlike LIBOR and the Euribor, precious metals reference values are typically based on transactions in the open markets and not just purely estimated estimates from banks. And also interestingly, Baffin has actually interviewed employees of Deutsche Bank as part of its probe, and that culminated last week. I believe it was last Friday that Deutsche Bank announced news that they were exiting their cartel of participating in the London gold fix, and they're actually one of only 3 banks that participate in the London silver fix. So it's a pretty big announcement when one of 3 banks that sets the global fix in silver is exiting that, and they're looking to sell that on the market, sell their seat or chair on the London fix to the market. And I can think of a couple of U.S. banks who are probably salivating at that. But Jim, I guess what is the significance in your eyes of the German Baffin market manipulation probe and Deutsche Bank exiting the PM fixing business?
Well, it looks like what began as the London LIBOR fraud, which, by the way, has resulted in exactly nothing. Nothing for prosecution, restitution, lawsuits, nothing. And that's because the lawsuits would be for, I don't know, let's say $500 billion in damage. No, you can't do that, so you ignore it. You push it aside, you kick it under the rug. What you're seeing is the London LIBOR fraud extending into the Forex and the gold markets. The Forex is giant. It's like $8 to $9 trillion traded per day. And when you see that Deutsche Bank is exiting the London gold fix, that's pretty big news, because anyone who knows anything about the London fix knows that it's just a colossal example and exercise of collusion where insiders do their trading, called insider trading, all very illegal and fraudulent and permitted because U.S. and England are pretty much the axis of global fascism nowadays, and that's not very well understood by Westerners. So you no longer have Deutsche Bank participating in criminal fraud regarding the London price fix. Anytime I hear the word fix, I think of collusion. It's being fixed, a price fixing scheme. Well, since when is the London fix not a price fixing scheme? All right, just a little background about German Baffin. I don't know exactly what Baffin stands for, but the Fin is probably financial in the German language. But it's not overrun by the German bankers. Unlike the Securities Exchange Commission and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission in New York, unlike the U.S. financial regulators for stocks and commodities, which are basically revolving doors of Wall Street executives making sure that the fraud committed by London and New York working in collusion never gets prosecuted, and if it ever does, it goes to compulsory arbitration where their decision is final. Unlike all that, the Germans are not populating Baffin with banker harlots, placed insiders, but instead with reputable people. I've contacted a couple of German contacts, German sources, and they say it has a history of not dropping an investigation once begun and seeing it to its end. They don't let things go. They don't get a phone call and drop everything. You know, a phone call from JP Morgan, drop everything. A phone call from Goldman Sachs, drop everything. A phone call from the other crime center, the Attorney General's office of the U.S., and dropping everything. Or a phone call from the other gigantic crime center, U.S. Department of Treasury, and drop everything. No, Baffin takes it to its end. The financial legal authorities actually are working, I heard this 2 years ago, with Interpol Serious Fraud Division. I was told in late 2011 that the Serious Fraud Division of Interpol was going to start focusing on Deutsche Bank. I told Hat Trick Letter subscribers back then, look for a lot of scrutiny to come to Deutsche Bank. Look for Barclays, Deutsche Bank, and Citigroup to all receive tremendous amount of scrutiny. Those are the three broken pieces in Germany, England, and the United States. So Germany is starting to prosecute the Western bankers, but at the same time they're turning their alliances east to Russia and China. I think we're seeing high-level markets on cash, currency, and gold all being recognized very widely as being hopelessly corrupted. The Deutsche Bank is under scrutiny for something extremely serious that just doesn't get the proper publicity. Back about 1999 and 2000, when all these different nations were working and striving to qualify for the European Monetary Union, otherwise called the common euro currency, they were trying to qualify to use the euro in a common currency fashion market. And they had to satisfy the Maastricht rules. So what happened? You had Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs all working together in a collusion to conceal the debt levels, the actual debt levels. They falsified the debt levels. Deutsche Bank was the main architect of this, but they had a lot of help from Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. I've seen both banks mentioned in the collusion cases. So what they did was they hid and concealed and changed the debt levels of these countries, like Spain and Italy, for instance, and made it look like a currency swap. So they concealed the debt and made it look like currency swap to deceive and get around the EMU Maastricht rules. I can't think of a bigger fraud, scandal, crime in banking than falsifying a qualification for a union of 15 nations. For God's sake, we've got to start following through on this criminal activity. And what I've heard from a good, solid German source who has friends in conglomerates in Germany and who has friends working closely with the banking industry, he says, word I'm hearing is that Deutsche Bank is going to be broken up into 5 parts. And this is a result of compromises with Interpol's Serious Fraud Division. This is a result of cut deals with, I'm hearing it's like 6 or 8 different vice presidents in Deutsche Bank who have already begun cooperating. I mean, we're talking well along. They're months along in revealing disk drives and all kinds of email information, trading schedules, trading outcomes, all kinds of stuff. This is several months along for Deutsche Bank. And there's a funny little story, really briefly. This happened about 1.5 years ago, but Joseph Ackerman, who was fired as CEO of Deutsche Bank, he had his offices raided by Interpol agents. So he made a phone call. He said, get out of here. And they said, no, we're coming in to download stuff off your computer, sir. Move aside. And Ackerman said, well, let me make a phone call. He made a phone call to some regulator, banker official that he thought would, pave the way to brushing these guys off. And the bank official told Ackerman, sorry, this is out of my hand. It's over my head. Then he made another phone call to a high-level Supreme Court justice in Germany who told him the same thing. This is out of my hands, over my head. Something very big is going on. It involves Interpol. It's now involving Baffin. And I think it's going to spread not just to the gold market, but I think it's going to spread to Forex already with the Maastricht criminal violations. These are serious accounting fraud cases. So we got a lot of things going on here with Baffin in Germany, but Deutsche Bank is starting, to get some strict accounting, legal scrutiny, and possibly start a sequence of bank failures in Europe.
Definitely could. Why don't we move on a little bit here, Jim? The other big story in my mind over the last couple of weeks is the MSM openly admitting that the London gold vaults have been drained. On Bloomberg, there was an interview about a week and a half ago where the trader said that just a couple of years ago there's gold up to the ceiling and now the vaults are empty. So I wanted to get your opinion here and see if you had any other information or anything else you could share on the story of the London gold being drained from any of your sources that you have contact with.
It's being drained, and the story is so much bigger than even some of these anecdotal stories are indicating. Yeah, the people who walk by and the people who stick their heads in and, yeah, okay, where'd all the gold go? Well, what I've got is a source who is very close to the gold market. It's The Voice, and he doesn't like too much publicity. So let me just say that my source, who was very much closely involved with the drainage, just a little preliminary backup piece of information. Back in November of 2011, so we're talking over 2 years ago, he wrote me a message, and I didn't know how to interpret it. It was very simple. He said, Jim, something huge has happened. There's now $50 billion being made available through a line of credit, and that amount, that fund, is drawing from enormous gold accounts. And they're not selling gold. They're drawing money against the gold collateral, making a war chest. And I said, well, what's the war chest going to be for? And he said, going after the London bankers. And I thought prosecution. No, it turned out that they're going to drain them. So I got a message from him in early April and then again in May of 2012. So 4 or 5 months later, 6 months later. And it said, the war chest that I described to you, which was just the start, a $50 billion war chest, that's billion as in boy, not million, $50 billion war chest, has been used to drain approximately 1,000 tons per month out of the London banker gold vaults. And I said, gee, when would that drain them? And he said, oh, don't worry, they've got a lot of tonnage. So 3 or 4 months later, he said, it all started around April 1st, and it involved a tremendous amount of drainage that continues at 1,000 tons per month. And I said, well, why don't they satisfy these margin calls you referred to with just printed money off the Weimar press that the Bank of England, the Euro Central Bank, and especially the Fed operate? And he said, well, it's not like that. It's not as simple as that. I said, well, help me understand. And he said, well, the source is legacy gold from ancient Eastern families. I said, is this all China? And he said, it's mostly China, but it's Eastern. Just think of it as Eastern that's led by the Chinese. I said, well, why don't they print some money and pay off the margin call? He said, it's not that simple. These are complex old contracts having to do with Southern European sovereign bond derivatives. And I said, do they have to do with, say, the beginning of the European Monetary Union, where they had a lot of derivatives used as foundation for creating the euro? And he said, that and a lot of other things. But rest assured that when the pigs, it's Portugal and Italy and Spain and Greece, when they all had their sovereign bond problems, it affected these particular derivatives. And I said, well, I still don't understand. Why don't they just pay it off with printed cash? And he wrote back and said, because the collateral on these derivatives was improperly used. And I said, are you telling me that ancient Asian Chinese gold was used improperly against their permission? So allocated London gold accounts owned by Chinese, etc., were improperly used? on huge derivatives that helped set up the euro and helped finance the sovereign debt all across southern European nations. And he said, you read me correctly. Whoa. So what happened was the improper usage for collateral of derivatives had to be satisfied in the same like terms, same type of instrument. In other words, they had to replace the gold that they stole, hypothecated. I love the word hypothecated. Every time you hear it, just think stole, pilfer. They had to replace the pilfered allocated Chinese accounts in London with more gold, and that's part of the drainage. So, woo. Then, okay, it gets better, because in the following months, several months later, I said, is that 1,000 tons a month? Is that flow going from London to points east in Asia? Is that continued? I heard nothing, and I heard nothing, month after month, and then suddenly in November, he said it never stopped. And I said, well, wait a minute, that's 18 to 20 months. And he said, yes, 1,000 tons a month. It never stopped for 18 to 20 months. Do the math. I'm pretty good at that kind of math. That's 18 to 20,000 metric tons. You hear all these stories about the Swiss refiners working overtime, recasting gold. Well, this is what they're doing. The London boys use the gold improperly, and they're scrambling to replace it. They're not saying, oh, here's that Chinese gold from the old families, the ancient families, the legacy gold. Let's go send it over to them. It's in kilograms as they delivered it. No, they're replacing it. That's why the recasting is going on. They're recasting ounce bars, like 10,000 ounce bars or whatever. I don't know what the big popular ones. I think they're 10,000 ounce and 40,000 ounce big bars. So all these Swiss refiners that are working overtime, they're satisfying some of this demand, but they're also satisfying a tremendous amount of Dubai, UAE demand that I think is heading straight to Turkey. The majority is heading to China, but the majority is heading to Turkey, but a portion of that is going also to China from Dubai. It's a major center. And people wonder, well, what's all this recasting going on? Is it more than just the kilograms? No, it's not just kilogram, but it's going to 5.9 quality purity, 99.999, 5 nines. That's the purity. I think that some of the London, I don't know the exact, I think it's 99.9, 3 nines. So it's going from 3 nines to 5 nines, or 99.995. I don't know exactly how, but it's a slightly higher purity for the Chinese standard and in kilograms. I think it means that China is working vigorously now for a number of different things, including a yuan currency backed by gold and gold-backed trade settlement. The wild card in here, this is just speculation on my part, conjecture, but it's somewhat informed. You got to figure that's a lot of gold. So perhaps we're starting to see something that I forecasted a few months ago, where the BRICS Bank, the BRICS conversion, the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, maybe they've already started the conversion of their treasury bonds to gold bullion. Maybe it's all being done under the watchful eye of the Chinese, which has joined the legacy gold being redeemed and recast from London after they find some scrambling around. So, these are migration trends. And we're going to learn some of the details in a couple of years. I like to try to stay in front of it, try to stay current, make some intelligent conclusions and implications, piece it together, connect the dots, call it what you want, but there's a tremendous amount of gold moving from London by way of Switzerland with the recasting, going to China. I think it's Hong Kong, it's China, but I think this is more than just the Chinese with the plans of a gold-backed yuan currency. I think this is more than this is more than a gigantic paradigm shift of displacing the dollar in trade settlement and moving toward gold settlement. One of the biggest backfires you've got in financial modern history right now, John, is the Iran sanctions that were imposed almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, and a grand backfire as Iran worked with Turkey as an intermediary for third-party energy sales settled in gold. Exactly. They worked around the sanctions.
Exactly. And just to give a little bit more credence to those claims that you're stating there about China preparing for a gold-backed trade settlement system with yuan, was the news that was reported just in this past month by the Shanghai Daily, which is the largest English language speaking publication in each China, the Shanghai Daily. It published this month a story that the Chinese central bank is on the verge of announcing its gold holdings have nearly tripled from just over 1,000 metric tons to over 2,700 metric tons. And that was reported again by the English language Shanghai Daily just in the past month. So I think that gives a little bit of credence to those claims you were making as well, Jim.
Well, let me follow up on that. They're going to claim that their gold holdings on the official reserves tripled or so. The reality is very different. They're always going to be lowballing. I'm hearing it's 15 times. The official gold holdings is on the order of 15,000 tons for the People's Bank of China. So they're going to admit that they went from 1,000 to about 3,000 tons when it's a lot higher than that.
I definitely agree. It is a lot higher than that, but in the Western financial mainstream media's eyes, I think it's going to shock the market even just admitting a tripling of their reserves.
I think it'll be a big fat yawn. We'll see. Big fat yawn. And there's another side to this gold trade settlement. I was told 2 years ago, and actually when I first heard it from the voice, he said, don't mention this for a few months. It was something he said, it's going to facilitate trade with gold trade settlement, and it will be a form of letter of credit. And the letter of credit will be called the gold trade note. You must post gold, perhaps with some leverage, a margin, and you must post the gold in order to win your letter of credit for the trade transaction. And I've been wondering for the last several months if this gold trade note is going to eventually morph into a letter of credit that's backed by the Chinese yuan, gold-backed Chinese yuan. I'm wondering if the gold trade note will be interchangeable with a gold-backed yuan letter of credit. I think they're going to be interchangeable, and that's going to be a transition point. You can't just go to gold trade settlement, even with an intermediary of Turkish banks. You can't do that right away. You've got to have some kind of stepping stone to it. And I think it's going to be the gold-backed yuan-denominated letter of credit. That's my theory.
I wanted to get your thoughts also, Jim, on how, whether you thought there was a correlation, in my mind there probably is, between all these events in the Asian gold market and all the events related to the end of the petrodollar standard, particularly with the fiasco in Syria, as well as you alluded to already, the Iranian sanctions that have backfired. So what's your thoughts on the correlation between all these and the end of the petrodollar standard and everything that's involved in that with the oil pipeline and everything?
Well, first of all, as preface, let me just say my quick opinions on Syria. It's not about, insurrection within Syria for more rights or just ending the corruption or whatever with the Assad government. This is about blocking the Iran gas pipelines that would go through the Shiite northern Iraq area straight into Syria and go to Mediterranean ports where that gas would find its way to European markets controlled by Gazprom and a whole lot more Russian influence to, I think that the whole war effort in Syria is to interrupt a process that's underway right now where the petrodollar is being dismissed, going through a demise, a sunset, a death, call it what you wish. And as the petrodollar is being phased out, I think we're going to be moving really quickly into the petro-yuan. And the framework, I call it the skeleton framework of the petro-yuan, has two important elements. And that's the energy pipelines run by Gazprom, which will be connecting the Iran-Pakistani pipeline and connecting the Iran, I call it the Shiite pipeline, going through Iraq into Syria. Gazprom will be run by Russia. Russia will be directing the actual physical, tangible part of the petro-yuan new standard that displaces the petrodollar as the Saudis are pushed to the side. The other part of this petro-yuan standard is the financial linkages to the Shanghai crude oil futures contract. The Shanghai oil contract is denominated in yuan. Now you watch soon, Persian Gulf oil is going to be tied with Russian oil pricing in Chinese yuan denomination. That is the essence of a petro-yuan standard, de facto standard. We're seeing the end of the petrodollar. We're seeing the end of the huge Saudi influence. I'd like to say something that I learned just in the last few days that's mind-numbing, that some of the London and Swiss gold going to China is rehypothecated Saudi gold. They're looting the Saudi allocated accounts because now there's friction between the Saudis and the United States. The Saudis were threatening to shut down the U.S. embassies on Saudi soil. We're now getting stories in the New York Times that the Saudis are responsible for a great deal of terrorism. The remarkable story for me that Americans haven't fully digested yet is that the Saudis are involved in terrorism activities in Syria using Al-Qaeda with U.S. support, and the Americans can't figure out that Al-Qaeda is a U.S. government securities agency tool.
And it's not just Syria. They've threatened to, if Russia didn't do what they wanted in regards to Syria, that they would let their operatives in Russia have free reign on the Sochi games. And sure enough, we've had, 3 or 4 terrorist attacks around Sochi already, and the games haven't even started yet.
Yeah, I didn't even know, I'll be honest with you, I didn't even know that some of the southern Russian provinces had Islamic, I don't know what you call them, I hate calling them terrorists, has Islamic radicals, violent factions. But there were quite a few. Some estimate 2,000 different southern Russian, Chechen, Islamic radicals joined the battles in Syria. I didn't know that. What you've got is a whole shift. It's about 10 moving parts now. You got the Syrian battles, you have the Iran pipelines, you have Chinese military protection now being offered to the Gulf states, you have peace talks with Tehran. They're all tied together. You have important military meetings with the Gulf Co-op Council of 4 or 5 nations. I don't remember, can't remember exactly, but it's not every one of the Persian Gulf nations. 4 or 5, including the Saudis. These military meetings are with China on military security. Well, the protectorate role has been the U.S. military for 50 years, 40 years. That's beginning to change. You had these Iran nuclear talks. I have a different name for them. It's more based in reality. It's the petrodollar surrender talks for the global transition to a petro-yuan, with agreements made on, well, if a nation abandons the dollar standard for trade, if a nation abandons the dollar treasury bonds, dollar-based treasury bonds in their banking system, they won't be attacked. They won't be subjected to surprise Al-Qaeda terrorist events in their train stations and their public malls, like in Kenya. No, the Geneva talks over Iran are about the petrodollar and its surrender. This is game over. The petrodollar demise is tied with Saudi instability, the birth of the petro-yuan, and the Iran revival. I've been on record now saying for a couple of weeks, almost a month now, Iran is going to be seen as a stable force, a cog in the Persian Gulf. The Saudis are going to be painted as the radicals. The Saudis are going to be painted as the disruptive influence. They're disrupting things all across the Arab arc Okay, and Bandar, Prince Bandar, the lunatic, he's in charge of the security operations for the Saudi royal house, the House of Saud. He survived an attack. I got an incredibly weird little story. A Hat Trick Letter subscriber told me 4 months ago, he said, you know, I'm living in Latin America now, but I used to work as a hospital consultant setting up IT systems, their computer systems. And I said, where was that? And he said, Jeddah. And one day, Prince Bandar was wheeled in, all blown to pieces. He was in intensive care for 30 days. I stuck my head in there, but they pushed me away. So I finally was able to talk to a couple of nurses who said, yes, as far as they know, that's Prince Bandar. And he had, you know, helicopters dropping off people who wanted to visit him after he recovered a bit. Well, I think it was about 2.5 months. He was gone. He's back doing his little assassinations in the Assad regime. He's credited, the Saudis are credited with 2 different assassinations in the Assad regime of Syria. So we're going to start seeing more and more stories like the New York Times blaming and painting the Saudis as terrorist, radicals, disruptive, you know, violent types. Oh, so much is going on. You know, I love this term MENA, Middle East, North Africa. The MENA disruptions for Arab Spring, I'm told, have a secondary motive: to steal their central bank gold. Way back in the spring of 2003, I think it was 1 month after the shock and awe of taking over and annexing Baghdad, there was a goofy story saying that the U.S. military had secured a couple of warehouses full of yellow painted wooden bars. No, they're trying to cover up that they stole the Iraq central bank gold. This is what Nazis do. Wake up. Wake up. It's not just stealing Czechoslovakian and Hungarian central bank gold in the 1940s. It's stealing the Libyan central bank gold. It's stealing the Libyan Gaddafi gold in London. It's stealing the Tunisia gold. It's trying to steal the Egyptian gold, and that did not work. Now they're trying to steal the Syrian gold. And I think they're in the process, John, of stealing the Saudi gold. Whatever's not locked down in Saudi Arabia, namely all their allocated gold accounts in London and Switzerland, they're being stolen. Now this is a massive global paradigm shift where we're seeing a phase out of the petrodollar, the birth of the petro-yuan, the launch of gold trade settlement, all while the Saudis just get kind of faded away. I think they're going to maintain their regime. That's the best research and intelligence that I've heard. They're going to maintain their regime, but only by making a new alliance with China and by cutting some deals and making some reforms internally. They've got a lot of problems inside Saudi Arabia with rising energy costs and a lot of objections to strict Islamic law. Just so many problems inside Saudi Arabia. But one source told me that they could afford to dispense $100 billion a year for 5 years in cash to the Saudi citizens just to appease them, to prevent, you know, more violent disruptions from, you know, street violence and trying to overturn Saudis coming out with their black SUVs. The Saudis are going to probably maintain the system. They're experts at controlling the balance of numerous tribal frictions and conflicts. A lot is going on, but I think people need to really pay attention to what's going on in Saudi Arabia versus Iran, how Iran is now turning favorable in the stories. They've never been involved in a nuclear weapons program. It's nuclear enrichment for electricity generation. France is well along in that, but France is not a terrorist nation, is it? Now, the violation from the Iranians was the same one that Saddam committed. He was selling, and so are the Iranians, even now, all through the sanctions, they're selling their oil and gas outside the dollar. Any nation that does that is deemed a terrorist rogue nation, and that's what the Geneva-Iran talks are all about. The petrodollar surrender and all the different norms for bank practices that are going to be permitted for selling oil and gas outside the toxic, dying dollar.
Right. Okay. Well, Jim, we'll keep our eye on Saudi Arabia as the focal point here. I think this will be a good place to wrap up here. We could probably keep the Jackass talking all day. But before we let you go, Jim, of course, your public articles can be found regularly on silverdoctors.com. How can readers check out your subscription services? Tell them a little bit more about that and where to find your work.
Okay, briefly, it's the Hat Trick Letter. That's the name of the newsletter. It can be found on www.goldenjackass.com. This April, it's just a few months away, we'll have the 10th anniversary. So that's very exciting for me. I never thought that it would go more than a few years. But, it's over a couple thousand subscribers and a lot of good sources. It's not just the one particular gold trader source. I've got 2 or 3 others. I've got a former London banker with tremendous insights into his home region of Turkey, India, and Iran. What a gold mine of information and analytic interpretations he's been. But what I've got now is basically 2 different types of reports. I won't go into great detail because there's some minor changes on formatting some of the editions, but it's basically 2 types of reports that are being posted every month. And it's the Money War Report and the Golden Currency Report. The Money War Report is for high-level things like disruptions to the petrodollar, launching of gold trade settlement, major central bank decisions. I forecast at the beginning of QE in early 2012 that it would be QE forever, QE to infinity, unlimited hidden bond monetization. I forecasted in 2009 when we started seeing the 0%. It'll be 0% forever. They can never afford to raise interest rates again. And now we're starting to see as permanent what I call the QE to infinity and ZIRP, the zero rate forever. So those are all forecasts that came in the Money War Report. The Golden Currency Report is much more the nuts and bolts, like coin demand and the flow to China. Has to do with a lot of the individual currencies and issues like the Swiss franc euro peg. By the way, there is a tremendous amount of pallets, shrink-wrapped Swiss franc currency bills that are being stored in large Swiss homes by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. So they know something. I think what they're saying is, and this is covered in the Golden Currency Report, I think that what they're saying is that the peg is going to break and the Swiss franc is going to jump like 20–30%. So we got a lot of things going on, and those 2 reports are found as part, they are the Hat Trick Letter. Anyway, goldenjackass.com website, go take a look at it.
So check it out at the goldenjackass.com. So for the doc and Jim Willie, the Golden Jackass himself, thanks for tuning in to silverdoctors.com radio. Great to have you back, Jim.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
The Doc's new investment option.
Lead bullion.
Buy your ammunition from the Doc today at sdbullion.com.